Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the discussion that is focusing now on another chapter, chapter 9 of the book, Jesus in Our Days. Let's just go over a few minutes on what are we studying today, what are we discussing today. And before we talk a little bit about the chapters, I just want to say that the psychological series by Joanna de Angelis is both powerful and impactful. So I am Marcia Trajano, and I am honored to be here to present some of the ideas found in this book. And just as a reminder, the intent of the series of live talks is just to go through those very insightful messages that are contained in the very first book of the series of 16 books. So we are doing working with this proposal to review it on a weekly basis. And each chapter, I have to tell you, about 3 pages long, which means by the time you listen to me, you could have read it. And if you do both, I'd love to hear from you. Let me know if we're really working with the same content in a way that is representative and that can help you understand it. We dive into the teachings, and those teachings are by Jesus, right? And we look at it and they see, my goodness, I never thought about it, and how does it mean to deal with those contents? How do they touch us? So just wanted to let you know that Joanna brings us a new view of Jesus. And this is an image of Jesus no longer at the cross. He is an uncrucified Jesus, and he's welcoming us to understand and really see how we deal with situations, mostly challenging situations, when we are confronted by them. So, in any case, those are all therapeutical teachings, and they will lead you, I promise you, to health, to peace, and to a sense of happiness. So, today we're talking about Jesus and joy, and next week we will discuss Jesus and courage, chapter 10. Let us just go ahead and get started. Today, in the very beginning of this discussion, we're going to focus on emotions. I love it. And I want to say to you that feelings and emotions, in fact, are such a rich and intriguing type of areas. It's truly a universe that we need and we should know, right? We need to understand within us. And when we do that, I have to tell you, they will transform ourselves for the better when we get to better understand them. So some people may say that humans do not possess emotions, but in fact, the emotions are those that possess man, right? Mankind, humankind. And I just find it very interesting because you can we can really pause to think about it. How do I see myself when I am emoting, right? When I am sad, when I'm angry, when I am, I don't know, afraid of something. How what is going on with this body, with this mind, with this spirit? So before we move on with this aspects of this emotions, I just wanted to briefly ask you and myself, can we define emotions? What are they? And I want to say that American psychiatrist Eric Berne, and he passed in 1970. He was born 1910. He is the founder of transactional analysis, and he established in his writings a theory of five basic emotions, and those are important for us to see because that just means that there's many, many more emotions, but those top five will it will see them, we will feel them almost daily. What are they? Well, anger, fear, sadness, joy, and affection. So it's very easy when we listen to those five basic emotions, we can divide them into groups, right? The first three, anger, fear, sadness, is perhaps not so pleasant to feel, and the joy and affection, those are the opposite. They're pleasant and they're welcomed in our daily lives. Well, Joanna de Angelis proposes that, yes, unpleasant, Mr. Byrne, right? Unpleasant and pleasant. But she says, let's just put them as positive and negative. And when I read that, I go immediately into this paralysis. Why do we have to label them, Joanna? But she labels them not purely on what they are, but based on the purpose on one hand and the consequence, the result of each emotion. So that's very interesting for me because we start to navigate a little differently, right? It's positive or not, pleasant or not, but what it is, why is it, and what is the result of such an emotion. So with this, I think we start to understand that an emotion, say sadness, which is so, especially in the past 200, 300 years in modern society, sadness is considered so negative, socially speaking, and yet, both Joanna and other authors, such as Mr. Byrne, Dr. Byrne, they say, well, there is a positive aspect to this emotion specifically. We're talking today about joy and sadness, but sadness as once socially considered as terrible, very bad. So no, no, it can be actually quite positive if it is directed to the right purpose. What are we talking about? Well, think about it as whatever drives you to a state of sadness, it may also drive you to a mm, reflective state, a sense of introspection, of a sense of I need to adjust. I haven't really been as good as I should, or whatever that may be. That we put in a sense of adjustments. And unfortunately, and that's really the unfortunate side of it, in a pathological way, if it's not really elaborated, worked on, viewed as an instrument for us to go into this self awareness, self reflection, etc., it may lead to depression. And that's the unfortunate thing when we talk about sadness. But if we talk about just a point counterpoint, right? If we talk about joy, which is lovely when you're joyful, when you smile, when you're just you giggle, right? With life is so good, and there's a sense of joy. And socially, especially a very in a very contemporary society that we live on, it is very considered very positive, welcomed. But right, but if just like sadness, it is misdirected, it may be used as a subterfuge or in other words, as a mechanism to hide something else. What I'm trying to say here is that joy, yes, joy may be used to maybe mask our fear or mask our sadness, or even in a pathological manner, euphoria. And I have to say, I hear many individuals go through this, and I am one of those. Yes, my fear as a young child or young adult, actually, of the loss provoked and funeral led me, like had led many others, to a euphoric state during the funeral of the father of a very, very good friend of mine. And I could not control myself. That was a defense mechanism to maybe masquerade what was the deep-seated feelings of fear that I was going through. But then we we get to this point, and maybe it would be good for us to pause to differentiate between emotions, feelings on one hand, and on the other hand, sensations. Yes. So let's start. Sensation simply means a feeling, and I'm touching myself, right? It's a feeling that is sensorial in nature. They are limited to the five senses. We're not going to talk today about those, but the sense of touch, the smell, feeling, those are all in the realm of sensations. When we get into the definition of emotions, and I'm going to spend just a few more minutes with those definitions, emotions are now a feeling, right, that is triggered by some external event, and they're there and they actually elicit a physiological response to that trigger. Emotions are mostly created to help us save ourselves. It's very instinctive in nature, and it's there to protect our own lives. And feelings, it's now in the realm of ideation or of your idea. So just to be more academic and define them more specifically, we would say that emotions can be defined at its root, right? The word emotion, right? It's energy and it's movement. And it may have many different intensities, but somehow they will promote physiological, that physical response, that shock in your system with that organic um, components, and they can deal with, for example, your breathing, your bloodstream, right, or even your digestive systems are compromised with those emotions. So if we talk about it again in the physiological response perspective, they simply reflect that hormonal discharge, for example, with joy, lots of dopamine. But if you talk about fear, for example, it's a lot of adrenaline in your bloodstream to trigger the fight or flight uh, aspect of your behavior, right? The key is, because anger, fear, sadness elicit those quick responses. It's instant, right? Some people, when they're angry, as you know, just the blood goes through the face and you get angry and your face changes. And it is something to trigger from the outside in and into the outside to fight, right? The fight or flight. And the fear, on the other hand, you just go into all those adrenaline to get you out of there and help yourself, save yourself. Um, Now, if we shift to the word feelings, we now start to think about an action or an effect of feeling. And so it is all, as I mentioned before, in the realm of mental or moral attitude. And it is characterized by a state of affection. And it is quite complex because it is from an emotions position of a person, it is innate predominantly, right? And they are that emotional response to an object or another person. It can be an idea, it can be a thing. And with that feeling, we're now converting whatever that is, that object, that thing, that philosophy into a sense of emotional response, such as fondness, affection, love. And it's very interesting here because, as you can see, one is very much the body's response, and the other is your emotional response from your ideation and feelings. So if we compare those two, we can say again, feeling is an emotional, mental attitude, and it is really linked to perhaps how I express or represent anything in the dimension of my ideas, my imagination, my thoughts. And for example, because of them, we use them to judge, to evaluate, while emotions is that feeling that hits you in the gut, right? And it's a quick, quick, quick. We don't have much time. Just something triggers those response, and all of a sudden we see that again. As I said previously, that some people believe that they end up controlling us if they are not managed properly. Allan Kardec, as you know, the codifier of Spiritism, explains yet another nuance for those this dialogue of emotion and feelings. But he now talks about passion, and he says, every passion that brings you and me, anybody, closer to our animal nature is actually driving us away from our true nature, which is our spiritual nature. The other side about it is that he says that every feeling that raises, that lifts us up to away from that animal nature, then again, it shows the spiritual predominance and control over our animal self, our animal instincts, and brings us closer to that perfection, that state of perfection that we all aspire. So, Joanna brings the notion of, and I'm putting two hands here, where here the center of your consciousness is your ego, and the below is the self, right? And when we are lying those egos and the self in the same axis, we're able to then balance our animal, often primitive nature, uh, represented by our ego. And at the same time, we can balance that spiritual, that sublime that is represented by the self, our spirit. So we can wrap this up, this discussion, with the idea that emotions and feelings are true reflections of our state, our spiritual state, whatever you are, right? And in this way, when we talk about we're fighting um, a feeling or an emotion as society um, gives us, right? We are really not fighting against those projections, but we're fighting against the strict structure or state from which those emotions or feelings come from, they originated. So this is very important. I'm not sure if I explained well here, but when we are looking, reflecting over what am I feeling, what am I emoting, I am looking at what it is that is driving me to be afraid, to be angry, to be, joyful, etc. So, from that perspective, emotional experiences, they play a major, major, major role in all of our lives. But, when that, back to the ego self axis, right? When these emotional responses are directed by a predominant, distorted, prevalent ego, it may become harmful and it may lose the function to lead us to a transformation of who we are into pathological states. So, interesting enough, when we just open the very first, this chapter of the first book of Joanna, we read, and it's titled Jesus and Joy, but we are confronted in the next several paragraphs with a focus on not Jesus and joy, but sadness, our sadness. And for example, Joanna, very, very sternly, she states that when sadness dominates, controls us, it also is the source for bitterness. So we become embittered beings. So she says to us, well, you, Marcia, and you who's watching right now, do not, do not become complacent toward that sadness that is controlled by our ego. This is important, right? Do not be complacent toward the emotions when they are dominated by our ego, or even allow yourself to create justifications for it. Quick example. Let's pretend that I don't know. I I am speaking here, and I'm really, really, really afraid that I'm going to mess up and that I am going to not do a good job. And that fear, one emotion, basic emotions in this case, is paralyzing me from coming and fulfill a commitment that I made to you to come once a week to talk about the chapter, right? But why am I so afraid? And that's where we need that review that we need to do with ourselves. Why do I feel this emotion so strong, and it's not allowing me to express what I prepared for you, and it's disturbing, and it's stopping whatever. And we may see that it's my ego. My perfectionist self is afraid that I may make a mistake on camera, live, and that my ego will be diminished as that. I hope this makes sense. So, anyways, back to Joanna. She does say that when perhaps mistaking or arguments that are deceitful in nature around um, sadness, unhappiness, dissatisfaction. Uh, Watch out, because as a mistaken argument, there may be there to let us avoid our reality, right? So, why is she saying that? Well, simply put, we all have to face problems. In fact, without them, without problems, this utopian life, this very idealized life, may not be a life worth living. Why am I saying that? Because we may not have the motivation to grow, motivation to confront a challenge, and in this confrontation, these challenges that life brings us to us, that we call many times problems, they may prevent us from growing, from progressing, spiritually speaking. So she counters this idea, problem and masking those problems. She counters that with the fact that whatever the cause may be of our problems, based on, I don't know, the issue of the day, right, or a current event, or something that it's out there in the social media, I don't know, whatever may be the trigger. She says, look at it, whatever that is, look at it, because it is our duty to transform that problem into an awareness, acknowledgement of it as a blessing to to inspire us to grow through our self-reflection. And that's the key to understand this chapter. Okay. Again, it's important to remember that unbridled, like any other emotion, sadness in this case is very toxic to our body, and she counters this awareness of let it be, let it grow, let it be uncontrolled in its own sadness. She says, no, everything around us, absolutely everything around us, is an opportunity for us to praise, to be joyful and grateful to God. So gratitude as a concept is, it permeates throughout her work in the psychological series, and it's really key to understanding that notion that she brings to us today, right? If we go further, and I would like to just talk a little bit further now, no longer about emotions and feelings, but sadness specifically, right? We can say that sadness is just the uh, absence of joy. And you can say, yeah, yeah, it makes sense. Sadness is not joy, is the void of a joyful situation. But we should not really understand sadness as discouragement, especially discouragement toward life as a whole. It should be instead interpreted as this beautiful, yes, beautiful invitation to introspection, to reflection. Last week, I talked a lot about St. Francis, and I let it slip that I'm going to Italy, to Assisi, and so I'm very inspired by St. Francis. But if you read his biography, you know that after he went as a young man to fight into the battle in Perugia, against Perugia, he comes back, and he gets into this sadness, this introspection, and even to depression for a rather long period of time, until he wakes up and is transformed into St. Francis we know today, right? That time, and many authors say that time of deep introspection that he felt, that worried his parents to death, by the way, it was a time that he needed to heal himself from the old a self that he was to the new that he embraced as and later became a saint. But if you think about it, to a person, in this case, Francis, he had a much more balanced ego. That sadness, that emotion that he felt so strongly, led him to analyze and to move out of it. For us, can we use that as the same vehicle, same trigger, same burst to for us to analyze uh, and review? Wait a minute, what is it that is triggering this or that emotion? What are the aspects that I'm, emoting, but I don't understand, that I need to consider in myself? Those are very mature elements for of a balanced ego. Sadness is indeed, I could say, a very, very, very common emotion, and it's often felt when something that is meaningful to us is lost. So I'm sad because I lost someone or something, or I am even dealing with frustration, right? For example, I'm frustrated because I desired, and I wanted something, but I'm frustrated. Therefore, I have that feeling of sorrow for something that I wanted, but I could not attain. And Joanna de Angelis describes it specifically as a natural phenomenon. Yes, we know it occurs to everyone. Yes, you know. And she says, yes, but it also occurs to even those who are going through the most amazing, extraordinary moments of joy. You can go through joys and sadness. It is part of life. So she says, sadness may be the result, among other factors, of a recollection, a conflict that comes from your former path as a spirit, so before this life, or a disturbance. I'm conflicted about something, and it has some very difficult repercussions, because when we are that sad, our vibration field lowers, and we can become prey to those that psychosphere that envelops us in beyond more sadness. So she says, when we go through those recollections, and we are just involved by, say, pessimistic feelings, she said, stop, right? Please look at those feelings and see, um, how can you perhaps review them and even replace them by different ideas, because it is important not to lower yourself and become vulnerable, right? She says, even a sad memory, you can turn them into something that is very positive. Let's say I eh, went through a very strong grieving process with the loss of my mother. But instead of just focusing on what I no longer have, if I can turn it into looking into the feelings of how important she was to my life, how much I loved her, how much she meant for me, how she continues to be a a being that I don't put in a pedestal, but I put as a role model. And it's a shift in from sadness to this sense of nostalgia of missing her. And then she goes on to say, right, if we get used to think through our emotional response in a positive manner, we are able to deal with good or even bad memories, right? And she says uh, those types of getting used to think this way, it those habits can become ingrained in we are, so that we get into very positive mental automatism, right? And it's important that we see this is who we are, who we live, and when we educate ourselves about triggers, responses, and how we can control by looking at our mental response, we then can get away from that in a way that is a positive thing. So, let's just go wrap it up our discussion today with this beautiful idea of self encounter. And she talks about Jesus, right? And she even says that only once she sees Jesus as becoming sad and even sorrowful. And it was the sense that just at the Last Supper, right, when he had his friends, his disciple with him, that were there to become vigilant, and he knew what was going on. He had awareness of all the next day, hours and days, right? And he becomes sad that those best, the closest people to him, they somehow, and I'm going to put air quote here, betrayed him, right? They did not know, his disciples that were there with him, they did not know the gravity of the moment. And in that, there is a sadness surrounding him. And it's important, and Joanna brings us beautifully here in this part of the chapter, because Jesus had complete awareness of the potentiality of each and every individual that he met, that he encountered. And because he knew it, that gave him a sense of joy. How did he do it? He did that by cultivating the joy of hope, the the idea that he could have the blessing of health to all of those that sought him, and moreover, he would give the gift of peace to all of those that were surrounding him. And he was joyful. Why? Because he had a mission, a ministry, if you will, and that ministry was one of the transformation of the entire human race, the transformation of the human being, and divide the old world into an entire new society with his teachings. He knew, and he presented us with the concept of life after life, the concept of the possibility of being reborn, in with that the sense of victory over death. So from this victory, what he brought in his joyful nature was the concept of happiness as a result from the freedom, the liberation from all of our fears. There is no longer the punishment through death. There's only life. So Joanna invites us to let let go of all our masks and anything that we may use as an escape mechanism, because as we understand, they are just simply part of our tools and defense mechanism and instruments that actually hide who we truly are, our true potential. Jesus could see it, but we somehow are hiding away from ourselves. So she says, go, go, sow fraternity, because this vineyard that after you sow, fraternity will await for you. And that invitation is quite meaningful because it is a call to have this new and up to date, no longer obsolete, self encounter. It is an invitation to look at ourselves, to examine ourselves deeply. And this self encounter, she asks, to be joyful, meaning it's not a self encounter that whenever I see something that I'm not really ready to see or that I want to begrudge, you say, no, do not blame, do not criticize, do not bemoan whatever it is that you're facing. Right. And once we do this, when we start to throw away judgments about who we are in that self encounter journey, that will lead us to be free and actually to head us into the direction of a very fulfilled, successful life. So I would say, let's take advantage of this imperative. And the imperative simply means it's a mandate for us to fulfill our own recovery, yes, recover from any illnesses. And we're talking about the illnesses of the soul that we bring with us. Let us meet our pain. Let's meet our sadness. Let's meet our anger, all of those emotions, including our joy. Let us face them. Let us look at all the sense of dread and fear as well as hope, because God, yes, God granted us all this right to to go into this journey. So I close today with those beautiful words that you find in the book in this chapter, which are the words from Jesus, where he says, "Rejoice, the kingdom of God has come to you." He says that this kingdom is actually within us. And simply put, it is waiting to be discovered. It is waiting to be inhabited. And those are the words in the book, right? It awaits us unyielding because it has come to meet us exactly where you are. Fantastic, isn't it? So, taking a step in this direction of the direction to the kingdom of God, when we enter it, we are filled with joy and rejoiced as we are, we will feel like a hero who, upon finishing the battle, feels victorious. So I hope our discussion today can open some doors around this topic. And I really look forward to talk to you next week when we discuss courage. Thank you so very much for being here with me. Goodbye.